Hello everybody, this is Kirby over yonder, and I love cartoons. I've grown up with cartoons, and one of my favorite things to do in my free time is, well, watch cartoons. And when you really like a cartoon, it becomes extremely disappointing when an episode comes out that is less than average. And unfortunately, those are the types of episodes that I'm going to be talking about in this list. It becomes really frustrating when a cartoon you otherwise really enjoy comes out with an episode that makes you so angry and so disappointed. Just keep in mind that I do still like every cartoon on this list. And even the best cartoons of all time can come out with an episode that's less than normal quality. Number 15. Roadside Attraction from Gravity Falls. For as much as I love Gravity Falls, this episode always just felt very awkward and kind of pointless to me. It's pretty much about Dipper trying to find a girlfriend while on a road trip, and he ends up on a date with Candy. This episode just has a very awkward feeling to it. Seeing Dipper and Candy interact and kind of try to act like a boyfriend and girlfriend, but failing, just felt very cringeworthy for me, and it definitely is nowhere near the same quality as most other Gravity Falls episodes. And it doesn't help that it serves basically no point to the overall story of the show, which becomes even more apparent when you consider the fact that it came out right in the middle of two other episodes that developed the story a lot. But that being said, this episode is at the start of the list, because it does have some funny jokes, and I like the moments with Dipper and Grunkle Stan bonding. Number 14. Leapfrogs from Rocko's Modern Life. Rocko's Modern Life is pretty much infamous for having a lot of really dirty jokes, and most of the time they're really funny. However, this episode took it a little bit too far. It's pretty much about Mrs. Bighead's awkward attempts to seduce Rocko. This episode has a very claustrophobic feeling to it that makes me personally very uncomfortable while watching it. Although this is a Rocko's Modern Life episode, so obviously there were some pretty funny jokes. However, the amount of ones that made me feel uncomfortable definitely overpowered the ones that made me laugh. Number 13. Candace Gets Busted from Phineas and Ferb. This episode's bad for a few different reasons. First off, the title. It spoils the ending of the episode. Like, Candace getting busted is supposed to be something that's a surprise. But when the title of the episode reveals the ending already, well, there's pretty much no point in me getting invested because I already know how it ends. Also, this episode feels very mean to Candace. All she's trying to do is see a few of her friends, yet a bunch of random strangers invite themselves over to her house and pretty much wreck the place. Although the segments with Perry and Doofenshmirtz were pretty funny, so they bring up this episode a little bit. Number 12. Dan vs. The Wedding from Dan Vs. What makes most Dan vs. episodes funny is the fact that whatever Dan is against is something either very relatable or very petty. However, a wedding doesn't really fall into either of those categories. And honestly, this episode just has a very nasty feeling to it. It's pretty much about Hortense from Dan vs. Burger File marrying Jebediah Burger, so Dan tries to ruin the wedding. It already doesn't help that this episode is tied into one of my favorite episodes of the entire show, but this episode also just feels very mean towards Hortense, who, by the way, loses in the end, and it has a very melodramatic feeling to it. And don't get me wrong, I love this cartoon, but this episode proves that if the writers took Dan's anger and went way too far with it, the show could have been much worse. Number 11. Panda's Date from We Bare Bears. In this episode, the three bears spend some time with this girl who Panda wants to date. Although We Bare Bears is a very charming and laid-back show, this episode just felt very awkward to me. The ways Panda tries to get Grizz and Ice Bear out of the picture so he can date this girl just felt very uncomfortable and kind of cringeworthy to watch. Also, this episode isn't as funny or as well written as most of the other We Bare Bears episodes, which makes it the worst of them. Number 10. Buster from Sonic Boom. I know many people debate on whether or not Sonic Boom is a good cartoon, but personally I consider it a pretty decent Sonic cartoon. However, this episode was just bad. It's pretty much about Sticks getting a dog that barks on people, and that's the entire joke. It's not funny, there's no other humor in the episode, and the story is very weak. It's just Sticks getting the dog, and then by the end of the episode it turns into a monster because it was created by Eggman. And besides that, there's not really anything else in the episode, which is why it's on this list. Number 9. Numbskulls from Uncle Grandpa. Like with Sonic Boom, many people don't consider Uncle Grandpa a good show, but I appreciate the show's creativity. What I don't appreciate is this episode. This episode's bad because it's pretty much just 11 minutes of random stupid jokes with no setup or context to them, which isn't funny. It just gets really annoying and grating to watch. In terms of plot, it's pretty much about Mr. Gus getting hit in the head, which makes him an idiot, but turns out that it wasn't Mr. Gus the entire time, it was just his stupid cousin. This episode was just insulting. Number 8, You're Ed Here, from Ed, Edd, and Eddy. Most people consider Sorry Ron Ed to be the worst Ed, Edd, and Eddy episode. However, that episode at least had some funny jokes, unlike this one. The episode's basically about Kevin learning Eddie's embarrassing middle name, so Eddie pretty much becomes his slave in order for Kevin not to tell everybody. But Kevin does tell everybody anyways, and they start making fun of him, leading Eddie to reveal Double D's embarrassing middle name. Both Eddie and Double D get made fun of for having embarrassing middle names, and the episode just has a very mean tone to it. It also doesn't have that same charm that most of the other Ed, Edd, and Eddy episodes have. Number 7, Amazonian Woman in the Mood, from Futurama. This episode is just awful. The men constantly make fun of the women for being too weak and too emotional, and the men in the episode are portrayed as complete jerks who make fun of women and only like them for their bodies, and would have sex with them even if it literally kills them. It feels like most of the worst Futurama episodes have these very sexist undertones to them, and whether you're a man or a woman, this episode is just very uncomfortable to watch. I know most people wouldn't consider this to be the worst Futurama episode, but in my opinion, out of all of the Futurama episodes, this one just has the nastiest tone to it. Number 6. The Triangle, from The Amazing World of Gumball. Am I the only one who just despises this episode? It is so awful to sit through. It's pretty much about Darwin wanting to be in his school marching band, yet for some reason, Gumball has to try to sabotage it. Gumball just becomes such an awful character in this episode. He just can't let his brother be happy. I just don't understand why the writers thought that constantly beating up on Darwin would be funny, and the ending is just insulting. Number 5. Hot Water, from American Dad. This is an episode that feels like it belongs more in Family Guy than American Dad to me. The episode's pretty much about Stan getting a hot tub and deciding to neglect his entire family just to be in said hot tub. Just the concept of Stan neglecting his family for a hot tub just leaves me with a bad taste in my mouth. The episode is also filled with weird imagery and bad songs, which just makes it even more uncomfortable. The ending is also pretty unsatisfying where
everyone died. The end.
That didn't help at all.
this episode is bad, but I'd still take it over Family Guy any day. Number 4. Do Me a Solid from Regular Show. In this sorry excuse for entertainment, Rigby makes Mordecai do 10 solids for him so Mordecai can go on a date with Margaret. But of course, Rigby uses those 10 solids to embarrass Mordecai in front of Margaret. This episode is so awkward to watch. Seeing Mordecai embarrass himself and make himself look like an idiot isn't funny, it's just really weird. And it just makes you feel bad for the guy. And Rigby just acts like a petty jerk in the episode, constantly embarrassing Mordecai for his own sick enjoyment and being rude to Eileen. This episode is just an unpleasant experience. I usually skip this one when rewatching the series. Number 3. Water Park Prank from Adventure Time. Now, despite the fact that Adventure Time is one of my favorite cartoons of all time, it does have a few less than stellar episodes. However, Water Park Prank has got to be the king of bad Adventure Time episodes. Just look at the visuals. They're hideous. All of the characters look like they're constipated, and the backgrounds are almost as minimal as 12-ounce mouse. The actual story is about Finn and Jake pranking Ice King while at a water park, and at the same time there are also these weird sad faces that make people sad or something. The story is stupid, bare bones, and honestly very forgettable, but what makes it worse is the awful animation. I know animation isn't everything, so it shouldn't matter, but for a show that looks as good as Adventure Time, yeah, the animation kinda does matter. Water Park Prank is an embarrassing pimple on what is otherwise a beautiful face. Number 2. It's a Wishful Life from the Fairly Odd Parents. Oh boy, this one. This episode is just awful. First off, the fact that it's a parody of one of my favorite movies of all time just makes it even more insulting. And the actual story is basically about Jorgen showing to Timmy that everyone's lives would be so much better if Timmy didn't exist. It's unnecessarily mean-spirited towards Timmy, who only did good deeds to these horrible people. This episode has a very nasty tone to it, and is severely lacking in comedy. The Fairly Odd Parents has quite a few bad episodes, but out of all of them, this one is easily the worst. Number 1. One Course Meal from SpongeBob SquarePants. This episode is just awful. It's basically about Mr. Krabs torturing Plankton, stalking him, and horrifying him to the point of suicide. Oh, and then laughing at said suicide attempt, because, you know, that's a great idea for a kid's cartoon. This is the only time a SpongeBob cartoon made me feel like I was watching Family Guy. We slowly see Plankton go insane, and it's not played up for comedy or really anything other than seeing Plankton in pain, who, by the way, is basically the protagonist in this episode, yet the episode treats him like he's the antagonist and Mr. Krabs is the protagonist. One Course Meal is an awful and nasty episode from a cartoon that is normally super polished. Just keep in mind that even though they occasionally have a bad episode, I still really like all of the cartoons on this list. Just about every good cartoon is gonna have a slip-up occasionally, and I think we should take the good with the bad. Not every episode is gonna be perfect, and we just have to face it and hope that next episode is gonna be better. And as long as we still have the great episodes that made me love the cartoon in the first place, I don't mind having the occasional bad episode here and there. Are there any episodes that you think I missed? Please let me know in the comments. Kirby, out.